So I was just meditating and I wanted to do this video about the story of Adam and Eve because there's always this misconception that the man does not take full responsibility of what is going on within the story. It is really a story about how the serpent wears many different disguises and how it is a negative energy transference of deception from one person to the next. Now, this prophecy had to happen in order for us to realize this so that we could have individuality within ourselves, to see past judgment, to see past illusion and smoke and mirrors. But it just means that the serpent ethics can live within all of us if we choose to release it out of ourselves. And that we don't have to be regimented in placing the blame on someone because they were deceived, they were cloned, they were put in the shadows. So it's kind of the symbolism I walk through the shadow of the valley of death and I fear no evil. It means that you are divinely protected. But this does not mean that the woman went into the folly, went into the gray, went and was the deceiver. It actually means that they both needed to take responsibility for their actions and what was performed here. So it was a misconception, it was a misdirection. Satan wears many brilliant disguises. So if we understand this notion that it's not the word of God, but it's the words and depictions and stories and examples of Christ consciousness, because it teaches us to really be understood in our energetic presence, to teach us how to manifest, to teach us and seek out who we really are. That it never condemned us for having these meditative abilities and these gifts of mediumship. It just means that we had to endure this prophecy so that we could see individuality, that we can actually see one another as people instead of understanding what life is. So we had to go into the tree of knowledge in order to go into the tree of life, in order from us to be man to woman to Christ consciousness again. So it's kind of understanding this notion that there is a chosen frequency here, there is a connection to be brought here, and a reinforcement of us connecting to the divine channel once again. So if we understand that the only way that we have anything comes from the divine feminine, if we are only understanding that you can't have the masculine and have a child, so fertility, nurturing nature, the ability to have forgiveness, the ability to be transparent, but we're always seeking balance. And that's where this story is significant because there was a misconception and a imbalance of what is right or wrong. So this means that we have to assume responsibility and not just go along the bandwagon. And so once we see that and we can pristinely understand this notion and understand this collective awakening, is that if we part the sea in our own lives as such, if we don't go across where the sea is parted and actually see for ourselves, it doesn't really make much sense. It doesn't really make much sense to kind of like understand like what that is and what that sense of worship is. And this is just my philosophy, take it or leave it, from a conscious standpoint, is that in the form of healing that we are presented reflections and distortions and miscommunications. So if we're presented that, we're able to reshift the direction of who we are. But this means that we're responsible for our energy and what we project and what we present, and that we don't give into the negative energetic transference of deception. So this is where ideas are conceived. So this is where we don't place the blame on someone, but we also understand that we can look past that. Because when you awaken or when you reincarnate here, you forget everything, which is the veil of amnesia. The veil is lifted from your eyes. You have new eyes. You're able to see Saul, the road to Damascus. You're able to kind of see that when you are weary, you can have your hands held up, just like Moses, meaning that you can walk but not faint. You don't just are led by your sight, you're led by your faith. So this means that we can see that within that notion or that collective idea that none of us are perfect, that we have seen the fall and the rise of many different individuals. So this means we don't have to despise who we are. We don't have to judge our brothers and sisters, but we can see when we have lost our way. Living in grace is a very hard thing to do. Stardom can leave you starstruck and blinded by the light. But to see it within yourself is to see through the eyes of God. And as you're seeing through the eyes of God, then you are made whole again. Then you are the Redeemer that lives within all of us. And so it's not very controversial to say that none of us are or will ever will be completely healed. But if there's a distortion in our life that presents something that can bring us back to wholeness once again, then it's not really good or bad. Light and darkness, God created the darkness so that we could understand and identify what true evil is, so that we could blend both of those energies together and come to a consensus of release from damnation, from condemnation, from judgment. So this is a prophetic message. This message is more so that it's kind of like we're placing the blame and saying, like, if you had a child and you were married and you both raised that child until they're 18 and then they became an alcoholic, and then you say, oh, it's your fault that Jeremy, your wife says, it's your fault that Jeremy's an alcoholic. When you didn't present that to that person, you didn't give them the temptation of that. But it just means that all of us are in the garden and we have the choice of choosing knowledge or life. That we can choose to either stay or go. That we can have a conversation with death. But death is not judgmental. Death isn't indifferent. It's kind of like how Saint de Morte took Jesus into the afterlife because he needed that goddess of death to give him that sense of passing over, passing on into the great beyond. So this is neither good or bad. This is neither light or dark. Is what I'm saying is that everyone on this planet has a story of redemption within them, and everybody gets presented a clean slate. Many people may not agree with that, but I'm here to tell you that it is true. It is something profound. It is something deep within ourselves to experience this once again. So, with the antidotes that I presented here, it is our eyes being wide open instead of wide shut, meaning that there is not a suppression of masculinity and the fragility of femininity, but it is the energy of calling it in. It is the energy of embracing our denser energies and calling in the protector spirit, not the destroyer spirit. So as I say this to you now, from the Old Testament, the blessing of the Old Testament, the Father will put his hands over you and speak blessings. And treachery, deceit, and trickery comes from a trickster spirit. It comes from a spirit of not being wise in the tongue, but soothing the ear, soothing and perpetuating the falseness. Truth comes from genuineness, comes from authenticity, comes from a state of belonging and feeling interconnected once again. So think about this for a moment. You may or may not understand this video, but I want you to watch it a few times and kind of understand what I'm saying. So this means that the transfiguration of the soul is us ascending into the spirit as if we are Jesus with his disciples. That's what he actually did. So the reenactment or the performance of many acts being performed again and again, kind of like with what's going on in our world right now, is that we keep going into the same karmic loop, time loop, performing acts again and again in a ritualistic way, instead of decompressing and releasing the composition of generating the context that we are the sinners. I don't believe in sin, but sin is problematic because it involves the state of being judged. So, kind of like the man and the woman in the story, we're both deceived by the serpent. It wasn't the woman's fault. It was just a transference of energy. So if that transference of energy happens, it can spread like wildfire. One bad apple ruins the bunch. The last one in is a rotten egg. Or so instead, what do you give your life to today? Do you give it to the doors of heaven, or do you give it to death? Do you breathe, or do you suffocate? Do you lend the hand or smack the hand away? So it's for you to decide what you think of this prophetic message. I am White Wolf. God bless you.